There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with terminal illness. It's not the loneliness of being alone, it's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who can no longer see you as anything but your disease. They see the hospital bed, the treatments, the countdown clock nobody wants to acknowledge. What they stop seeing is you, the real you. The person who existed before the diagnosis rewrote your entire identity. John Wayne understood this loneliness intimately during the spring of 1979. Here was a man who'd built his entire existence on strength, on being unbreakable, on embodying a version of American manhood that didn't flinch or falter, and now cancer was systematically dismantling every piece of that identity. His massive frame had withered, his legendary presence had become a cautionary tale. When the Duke walked into a room, people didn't see an icon anymore. They saw mortality wearing a famous face. The worst part wasn't the physical deterioration. Wayne had faced pain before. He'd endured injuries on film sets, surgeries, the brutal reality of losing a lung 15 years earlier, physical suffering he could handle. What he couldn't handle was the way everyone around him had already started mourning. They looked at him like he was a photograph, fading in sunlight. They spoke in hushed reverence, as if raising their voices might shatter what little remained of him. They'd transformed him from a living legend into a dying exhibit, and it was suffocating him. Then Dean Martin walked through his door and called him out for looking like garbage. Let me take you back to where this friendship actually began, because understanding what Dean did requires understanding who they were to each other. 1959. Howard Hawks was directing Rio Bravo, and he'd made an interesting casting choice. John Wayne, as the lead, was expected. The Duke had been playing cowboys and heroes for decades, but Dean Martin, the crooner, the comedian, the guy from nightclub stages and silly movies with Jerry Lewis, Hawks saw something others missed, and Wayne was skeptical about it. Dean showed up to that Rio Bravo set, carrying baggage. He was trying to escape the shadow of Martin and Lewis. He was trying to prove the Rat Pack wasn't just about drinking and looking cool. He needed people to take him seriously as an actor, and he'd landed this role as Dude, a deputy struggling with alcoholism and self-loathing. It was heavy material, the kind that requires you to access real vulnerability on camera. Wayne watched Dean work, and his skepticism evaporated. There was authenticity in Martin's performance that caught everyone off guard. The comedic timing he was known for translated into dramatic pauses that landed with emotional weight. His natural charisma became broken desperation. Dean wasn't pretending to be Dude. He was becoming him. Wayne recognized real talent when he saw it, and more importantly, he recognized a kindred spirit. See, both men shared something crucial. They didn't buy into Hollywood's mythology about itself. Dean didn't care about premieres or publicity. Wayne didn't play the political games everyone else played. They were professionals who did excellent work, but they refused to treat their careers like religious callings. This mutual disdain for industry pretension became the foundation of genuine respect between them. Their friendship developed slowly, the way real friendships do. They worked together again in 1970 on The Undefeated. They'd cross paths at events and actually enjoy catching up instead of doing the Hollywood fake smile routine. Phone calls happened occasionally. Lunches, when schedules aligned. It wasn't intensive or dramatic. It was just solid. The kind of friendship where you might not talk for months, but when you do, you pick up exactly where you left off. Fast forward to 1979, and both men were carrying weight. Dean's personal life had fractured. His marriage had collapsed. The bottle was becoming less of a companion and more of a dependency. The entertainment landscape was changing, and staying relevant required energy. He wasn't sure he had any more, but Dean's struggles were manageable compared to what Wayne was facing. Wayne's cancer had returned with a vengeance. The 1964 lung cancer that he'd seemingly defeated had just been waiting, regrouping, preparing for a more devastating assault. In 1978, it invaded his stomach. The surgery in January 1979 was catastrophic. They removed his stomach entirely. Imagine that for a moment. One of your major organs just gone. The recovery process wasn't recovery at all. It was watching your body forget how to function properly. The weight loss was shocking. Wayne had been a towering presence, 6'4", usually around 230 pounds of solid intimidation. By spring 1979, he was barely 140 pounds. His face had hollowed out. The signature John Wayne gait, that confident swagger everyone recognized, had been replaced by the careful movements of someone afraid their body might betray them at any moment. But Wayne wasn't surrendering. Stubbornness was coded into his DNA. He kept making public appearances because admitting defeat wasn't in his vocabulary. If he stayed visible, if he kept showing up, maybe he could convince himself this wasn't the end. Maybe he could hold on to being the Duke just a little longer. The Academy Awards ceremony on April 9th became a national moment of collective grief. Wayne walked onto that stage to present Best Picture, and the audience's reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps, tears. People couldn't process what they were seeing. This giant of American cinema had been reduced to a frail shadow. His voice, which had delivered countless iconic lines with commanding authority, now struggled to project beyond a weak rasp. He completed his duty with whatever dignity he could assemble. The standing ovation he received wasn't celebrating his presentation. It was a farewell. Everyone in that auditorium understood they were witnessing something heartbreaking and historic simultaneously. They were watching John Wayne die in real time, and the applause was their way of saying goodbye while he could still hear it. Backstage transformed into an impromptu wake. Hollywood royalty, crew members, executives, complete strangers, all wanted their moment with Wayne. They needed to tell him he was brave, that he'd inspired them, that his legacy was secure. They approached with tears and tender touches, treating him like ancient porcelain that might crumble under too much pressure. Their kindness was genuine and suffocating in equal measure. Wayne appreciated the sentiment. He truly did. These were people expressing real emotion, real gratitude. But appreciation doesn't eliminate exhaustion. What he desperately craved was someone who would stop acting like he was already in his coffin. Someone who would remember he was still alive and treat him accordingly. Someone who wouldn't tiptoe around the elephant in the room, but would punch the elephant in the face and move on with the conversation. A few weeks later, Dean Martin picked up his phone. He'd seen the Oscar broadcast like everyone else. He'd recognized what was happening to his friend. And unlike everyone else, Dean decided to do something fundamentally different about it. He didn't call to offer prayers or condolences. He called and told Wayne to be home tomorrow and not to die before he got there, because that would be inconvenient. Wayne laughed. Actually laughed. His daughter Isa, who'd answered the phone initially, heard that laughter from another room and froze. Her father hadn't made that sound in weeks. Real laughter had become extinct in their house, replaced by polite chuckles and exhausted smiles. Hearing genuine joy in his voice felt like hearing a ghost. The next day, Dean showed up at Wayne's Newport Beach home, and the family was anxious. Visitors had been draining Wayne's limited energy reserves. Maintaining his tough guy facade required effort he no longer possessed. They worried Dean's visit would exhaust whatever remained. They worried about managing expectations, about protecting their father from one more emotionally demanding interaction. Dean arrived and immediately bypassed the careful handling everyone else employed. He walked past Isom. Before she could finish her warning about Wayne being weak, he found Wayne in the living room, drowning in a robe that had fit properly months earlier, but now looked like he'd borrowed it from someone twice his size. The two men locked eyes. Dean saw everything. The devastation, the fragility, the countdown clock everyone could hear ticking. Wayne saw something different in Dean's expression, not pity, not sadness, just recognition. Dean was looking at his friend, not at a disease with a famous face attached to it. Jesus, Duke, you look like hell. What happened? You stop eating beef? Wayne's family held their collective breath. You couldn't talk to a dying man like that. You had to be gentle, supportive, respectful of their suffering. Dean had just violated every unspoken rule of terminal illness etiquette. They waited for Wayne to be hurt, or angry, or crushed by the casual cruelty of the comment. Instead, Wayne's face transformed. A massive grin spread across his features, and he erupted into deep, genuine laughter. "Screw you, Dean," he managed between laughs. "I'll still kick your ass, even like this." "With what?" "Those legs. I've seen stronger chopsticks holding up takeout containers. Wayne laughed harder. Get over here, you bastard. Dean sat down next to Wayne, not hovering like a nurse, monitoring a patient, not maintaining careful distance like someone afraid of contagion, just sitting the way they'd sat countless times before on film sets, in restaurants, at parties across 20 years of friendship. And for the next 2 hours, Dean executed the most compassionate act anyone had performed for John Wayne in months. He gave him normalcy. Dean didn't inquire about Wayne's health. Cancer didn't enter the conversation. Doctors, treatments, prognosis, all the medical machinery grinding away in the background remained exactly there. In the background, unacknowledged, irrelevant to the moment they were sharing. Instead, Dean gossiped. He complained about a Vegas performer whose singing was so catastrophically bad it qualified as performance art. He speculated about which Hollywood marriages were genuinely imploding versus which were just theater for the tabloids. He ranted about younger actors who didn't understand screen presence, who thought acting meant mumbling and looking tortured. Wayne contributed his own observations and arguments. They debated Western directors with genuine passion. Dean claimed Howard Hawks was overrated, probably just to provoke Wayne. Wayne called Dean an idiot, with the kind of affection that only real rares can deploy. They both laughed like nothing was wrong, like they were just two old friends killing time on a random afternoon. Dean told an absolutely filthy joke about a cowboy and a dancer. Wayne had probably heard it before, but found it hilarious anyway. Wayne attempted to reciprocate with his own dirty joke, but started coughing halfway through. Dean waited patiently, then deliberately finished the joke wrong. Wayne corrected him, and they argued about proper joke-telling technique, like it mattered, like they had infinite time to debate these crucial issues. Not once did the conversation turn serious. Not once did Dean's expression betray sadness or fear or grief. He treated Wayne exactly as he always had, with irreverent humor, casual affection, and complete acceptance of who Wayne was beyond his illness. Asa watched from the doorway at one point and later described it as transformative. She'd seen her father laugh more in those 2 hours with Dean than he had in the previous 2 months combined. Dean wasn't being careful, he wasn't being gentle, he was just being Dean, and that's precisely what her father needed. After about 2 hours, Dean stood up. "All right, Duke, I've got a thing." "A thing?" Wayne asked, smiling. "What kind of thing?" "The kind where I do things." "None of your business." Wayne laughed. "Get out of here, you bum." Dean started toward the door, then turned back. For just one moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked. His eyes met Wayne's, and everything Dean hadn't said out loud existed in that glance. Recognition, love, grief, the awareness that this was probably goodbye even though neither of them would say it. "Duke," Dean said quietly. "Yeah." Dean wanted to say everything. He wanted to acknowledge the inevitable. He wanted to express gratitude for their friendship, admiration for Wayne's courage, sorrow for what was being lost. But saying those things would destroy the gift he'd just given Wayne. It would transform the visit into a farewell. It would confirm what both men knew, but neither wanted to admit. So instead, Dean said, "Try to eat something, would you? You're making the rest of us look fat." Wayne grinned. "Get out of here before I throw something at you." Dean left. He drove away, and he never saw John Wayne alive again. 2 months later, on June 11th, 1979, cancer claimed its victory. Wayne's final weeks were brutal. Consciousness became intermittent. Pain became constant. His family maintained their vigil. Hollywood mourned publicly. The Duke was finally gone. At the funeral, Dean Martin served as one of the pallbearers alongside Frank Sinatra, James Stewart, and other legends. They carried the casket of a man who defined American heroism for multiple generations. Afterward, someone asked Dean if he'd known that visit would be his last opportunity to see Wayne alive. "Yeah, I knew," Dean admitted. "Did you say goodbye?" "No." "Why not?" Dean's gaze went distant. Because Duke didn't need goodbye. He needed to be treated like he was still Duke, like he was still here. Saying goodbye would have meant admitting he was leaving, and he wasn't ready for that. "Do you regret not saying it?" Dean considered this carefully. "No. Duke knew how I felt. We didn't need the words. What he needed from me was to be his friend, not his mourner. So that's what I was. Years later, Isa wrote about Dean's visit in her memoir, and her perspective captured something profound about what had actually happened that afternoon. She explained that everyone who visited her father during those final months came to say goodbye. They came to express their feelings, to achieve closure, to make peace with his impending death. Her father appreciated all of it, but it was exhausting. It reinforced constantly that he was dying, that people were already mourning him while he remained alive. Dean didn't do that. Dean gave her father 2 hours where he wasn't a dying man. He was just Duke, hanging out with his friend Dean. They joked about stupid things that didn't matter. They laughed about nothing in particular. And in doing that, Dean provided something more valuable than any goodbye could offer. He gave her father dignity. He gave him normalcy. He gave him 2 hours of feeling alive instead of feeling like a corpse awaiting paperwork. After Dean left, Wayne told his daughter something that stayed with her forever. That's the first time in months someone's treated me like a man instead of a patient. He had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. Dean had given him a gift nobody else could. This story transcends 2 Hollywood legends sharing a final moment. It's about what genuine love looks like when someone is dying. Most people visiting the terminally ill come for themselves. They need closure. They need to express their feelings before time runs out. They need to make peace so they can move forward with minimal regrets. Dean didn't come for himself. He came for Duke. He came to provide what Duke needed, not what Dean needed. And what Duke needed wasn't tears or farewells or sympathy. Duke needed to feel like Duke one more time. That's authentic friendship. That's authentic love. Not centering your own feelings, but focusing on what the other person requires, not saying what you want to say, but doing what needs to be done. Dean could have walked into Wayne's house and cried. He could have delivered a speech about their friendship's importance. He could have said a proper goodbye, and Wayne would have understood and appreciated it. But Dean recognized that Wayne had already heard all of that from everyone else. What Wayne hadn't heard, what Wayne desperately needed, was someone treating him like he wasn't dying. So Dean provided that gift, and it became the greatest act of friendship and compassion anyone showed John Wayne during his final days. When Dean Martin died in 1995, his daughter Deanna discussed her father's philosophy regarding death and friendship. She explained that her father believed the kindest thing you can do for someone who's dying is not make them feel like they're dying. Don't make their illness the centerpiece of every interaction. Don't treat them like fragile glass. Don't speak in sad, careful voices. Treat them like they're still the person they've always been, because that's who they want to be, even as their body fails them. That's what Dean did for Duke. He didn't pretend Duke wasn't sick. He acknowledged it with humor, joking about Wayne's appearance, but he didn't dwell on it. He didn't make it the focus. He moved past it and just spent time with his friend. That's the greatest gift you can give someone who's dying, the gift of still being seen as alive. The lesson here isn't about death. It's about dignity. It's about seeing past disease to the person underneath. It's about giving people what they need, not what you think they should need. John Wayne was dying. Everyone knew it. But for 2 hours on that afternoon in 1979, Dean Martin made certain that Duke wasn't a dying man. He was just Duke. Still tough. Still ornery. Still laughing. When Wayne died 2 months later, one of his final pleasant memories was sitting in his living room with Dean Martin, trading insults and inappropriate jokes like they'd done on the Rio Bravo set 20 years earlier. That's friendship. That's love. That's Dean Martin, not the cool crooner, not the Rat Pack King, just Dean. A man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is treating them exactly as you always have, even when everything has changed. John Wayne died knowing that at least one person still saw him as Duke, and that person was Dean Martin. That's the kind of friendship that transcends death. That's the kind of love that refuses to let disease define a person. That's the kind of courage it takes to look terminal illness in the face and say, yeah, but my friend is still in there, and that's who I'm here to see. Most of us will never face the specific situation Dean and Duke found themselves in, but all of us will eventually deal with loss. All of us will watch people we love suffer, and in those moments we'll have a choice. We can come to say goodbye, to get our closure, to express our feelings, or we can come to give them what they actually need, even if it means swallowing our own pain, even if it means pretending everything is normal when nothing is normal. Dean Martin chose the harder path. He chose to give instead of take. He chose his friend's needs over his own. And in doing so, he gave John Wayne something more precious than gold: 2 hours of being alive instead of dying. 2 hours of dignity, 2 hours of being seen as a man instead of a disease. That's the real story here. Not about death, but about how we choose to love people when death is coming. Not about saying the right words, but about doing the right thing. Not about our needs, but about theirs. Dean Martin understood something most people miss. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or emotional speeches. Sometimes love is just showing up and acting like nothing has changed, even when everything has changed. Sometimes love is making your dying friend laugh by insulting him, because that's who you've always been together, and maintaining that identity matters more than acknowledging reality. John Wayne spent his final months being treated like he was already gone. Everyone meant well. Everyone came from a place of genuine care, but their care suffocated him under the weight of their grief. Dean cut through all of that with a crude joke and 2 hours of normalcy. That's what heroes actually look like. Not the ones on screen, but the ones who show up in real life and give you exactly what you need, even when it's not what anyone expects.